Hope you've been practicing your yoga, Sergeant. You'll need all the flexibility you can get without a gun. One of them sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. The others chuckled, confident that the unarmed army sergeant in front of them was about to be embarrassed. But they were wrong. 4 elite Navy commandos. Rifles ready, eyes locked on a single unarmed woman. They laughed when they took away her weapons. But 79 seconds later, every one of them was flat on the floor, disarmed, pinned, and staring up at Staff Sergeant Elena Ward. And here's the part they'll never forget. She never fired a single shot. Military rivalry is one of those things you can smell in the air before you even see it happen. In places like Fort Wexler, it isn't just about training. It's a daily unspoken competition. Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, each branch walking around like they're the tip of the spear, convinced their way of doing things is the only way worth doing. And if you happen to be the outsider in someone else's arena, you can bet they'll remind you of it, subtly at best, or with outright mockery if they think you won't fight back. For women in uniform, especially in mixed branch settings, the rivalry often comes with an extra layer. Assumptions. Assumptions about strength, about capability, about whether you belong in certain units or scenarios. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes insecurity. But the effect is the same. People judge before they know. They decide your worth before you open your mouth or touch a weapon. That's the reality Elena Ward walked into. The early morning light at Fort Wexler was a pale, dusty gold, filtering through the fog of diesel exhaust and jet fuel. This wasn't the crisp postcard image you see in recruiting ads. This was the working heartbeat of a joint training base, concrete hangars lined like steel giants, the rhythmic chant of PT echoing in the distance, and the constant low thrum of engines. The air carried the scent of hot asphalt already warming under the rising sun, mixed with pine from the surrounding hills. Fort Wexler was a proving ground. Officially, it was for joint operations readiness. Unofficially, it was a playground for egos, where Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Raiders, and Air Force pararescue operators came to measure themselves against each other. Every drill, every exercise was another chance to stake a claim. And into this arena walked Staff Sergeant Elena Ward. She didn't carry herself like someone desperate to impress. Her woodland pattern BDUs were immaculate, boots polished but not overly so, functional, ready. The sidearm on her hip sat as if it belonged there, not like a decoration. Her posture was calm, her breathing steady. But her eyes, they never stopped moving. Not darting, not nervous, observing. She took in guard towers, blind corners, training zones, exit routes, every detail feeding into some mental map she seemed to carry everywhere she went. Elena had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but earned it, though not everyone noticed. To those who weren't paying attention, she looked like any other soldier reporting for duty. To those with sharper eyes, there were tells. The way she shifted her weight subtly to keep a full view of her surroundings. The quick but methodical chamber check she gave her rifle. The way her hand naturally rested near her sidearm without fidgeting. In a place like Fort Wexler, those habits meant something. They hinted at a background that went deeper than her file might suggest. But first impressions are tricky things. And for the small knot of Navy commandos who spotted her that morning, their assumptions landed fast and hard. She wasn't one of them. Certainly, she wasn't wearing their colors. She was smaller, lighter, quieter than the operators they were used to working beside. In their eyes, that translated into one thing, a liability. They didn't know that Elena had stood in rooms where hesitation got people killed. They didn't know she had trained others to survive close-quarters combat under real fire. All they saw was someone they could measure themselves against and come out looking better. For Elena, that was fine. Let them think what they wanted. In her experience, overconfidence was just another weapon to turn against an opponent. She had no need to prove herself in the hallways or during roll call. When the time came, the truth would have a way of surfacing. And at Fort Wexler, the truth never stayed buried for long. It started in the briefing room, a converted aircraft hangar with cold concrete floors, folding chairs, and a whiteboard crammed with diagrams for the day's exercise. The air buzzed with that low murmur you hear before any high-stakes training, boots scraping, gear clinking, small cliques swapping quiet jokes. Elena Ward chose a seat in the second row. From here she could watch the instructor, the door, and, more importantly, every face in the room. Years of habit kept her shoulders loose and her expression neutral. In the back row, four men lounged like they owned the place. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, the ringleader, was every inch the recruiting poster seal. Tall, broad-shouldered, sandy-haired, with a smile that rarely reached his eyes. Flanking him were Petty Officer Cole Ricks, stocky and self-assured. Chief Martin Daniels, older, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen combat but still enjoyed playing politics. And Corporal Adrian Vega, the youngest, his restless energy making him bounce slightly on the balls of his feet even while sitting. Major Billings began outlining the drill, an urban breach-and-clear scenario in one of Fort Wexler's warehouse mock-ups. The mission parameters were standard: four-person assault teams, live movement with simunition rounds, a timed run. Nothing unusual. Then Hale raised his hand. His tone was outwardly respectful, but every syllable carried a hidden smirk. "Sir, since we're testing adaptability under stress, how about we give the Army rep here a little extra challenge?" The room quieted. Billings, who had clearly dealt with Hale's brand of initiative before, narrowed his eyes. "What kind of challenge, Lieutenant?" Hale leaned forward, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Strip her weapons. Let's see how she handles herself without her security blanket." It was an old trick, one part test, one part humiliation. Daniels chimed in with mock sincerity. "Could be good training, sir. Out there, you don't always have your rifle." Ricks nodded sagely, like they were doing her a favor. Vega snickered, unable to hide his anticipation. This wasn't about training. This was about control, about four men making a public statement. "You're not one of us, and we can prove it." For Elena, the moment stretched. She felt every eye in the room turn her way. This was the decision point. She could refuse and be labeled difficult, or comply and risk becoming the butt of their story for the rest of the exercise, and maybe the rest of her time at Fort Wexler. Peer pressure in the military can be as dangerous as any battlefield. Pride runs deep, and once a reputation sticks, good or bad, it's hard to shake. But the truth is, this kind of setup isn't unique to the military. In civilian offices, too, people are tested in ways designed to make them fail. The rookie manager who's handed an impossible deadline, the new hire who's told to lead a client meeting without prep, the subtle games that say, "We want to see if you belong here," while quietly hoping you don't. Elena knew exactly what was happening, and she knew something else. Walking into a rigged game didn't mean you had to lose. She rose without a word, unbuckled her sidearm, and placed it on the table at the front. The M4 followed. Magazine removed, chamber cleared, every movement precise, deliberate. She didn't slam the weapons down in defiance. She set them there like someone placing tools in a safe place before using different ones. When she returned to her seat, Hale and his crew wore matching smirks. Ricks leaned toward Vega and whispered something that drew a chuckle. Vega's eyes flicked to her like he was already rehearsing his victory grin. Billings cleared his throat and wrapped up the briefing. "All right, first run's a test. If there's a problem, we adjust. Dismissed." As the chairs scraped and boots shuffled toward the staging area, Hale passed close enough to murmur, "Hope you've been practicing your yoga, Sergeant. You're gonna need it." Elena didn't respond. She didn't even turn her head, but her mind shifted gears. The mental checklist began forming. Body positions, joint locks, choke points in the mock-up's layout. Every weapon they carried was a potential tool, if you knew how to take it. By the time they reached the warehouse floor, the story had already spread. Spectators lined the observation deck, drawn by the promise of a spectacle. 4 armed SEALs versus 1 unarmed Army sergeant. It had the makings of a lopsided fight. The kind people came to watch for the same reason they watched demolition derbies: curiosity about the crash. Hale's team moved through their pre-mission routine with the easy confidence of men who believed they had already won. Elena adjusted her gloves, scanning the space. She noted the flex of the plywood walls, the sound of boots on the mock-up's flooring, the shadows that pooled in corners where the overhead lights didn't quite reach. Somewhere above, she caught fragments of conversation. 79 seconds. She'll be lucky to last half that. Hale's been waiting for this. The thing about being underestimated is that it comes with an advantage. Your opponents don't guard against what they can't imagine. Elena knew that once the whistle blew, she wouldn't have time to earn respect politely. She'd have to take it, and she intended to do exactly that. What no one on that observation deck understood yet, what Hale and his crew were about to learn the hard way, was that stripping Elena Ward of her weapons didn't make her harmless. It just made her faster. And the clock was about to start. The whistle's shrill blast cut through the warehouse like a blade. Hale's team surged forward, rifles shouldered, moving in the tight diamond formation they'd rehearsed countless times. The first corridor of the mock-up was narrow, walls of plywood and metal studs funneling them into a single-file kill zone. In theory, Elena, unarmed, was already at a disadvantage. In practice, this was exactly the kind of space she preferred. She hung back half a step, letting them believe she was following. Her breathing slowed, her peripheral vision widened. Years of close-quarters combat training had taught her that in tight spaces, speed and surprise outweighed raw firepower. First takedown. Vega, bringing up the rear, was the weak link. Nervous energy, weight shifting forward, attention divided between the mission and the audience above. As they cleared the first corner, Elena moved. Her left hand clamped the barrel of his rifle, driving it upward and away from her. At the same time, her right hand locked onto his wrist with bone-deep precision, twisting his arm into a controlled torque. Not enough to break, but enough to force compliance. A quick pivot, and his own momentum spun him into the wall with a thud. The rifle was hers before he realized it. In CQB, the weapon is just a lever. Control the lever. You control the fight. Second takedown. Ricks. The sound of Vega hitting the wall made Ricks turn instinctively. This was his mistake. Elena stepped into his space before he could bring his rifle to bear. Using the captured weapon as a hook, she swept behind his knee while driving her shoulder into his center mass. His balance broke instantly. He hit the ground hard, air rushing from his lungs. She dropped a knee onto his sternum, not enough to crush, but enough to pin, while her free hand applied a blood choke, cutting off his oxygen long enough to disorient without causing damage. Shock is contagious. Take out one operator decisively, and the others start questioning their own safety. Third takedown. Hale realized the scenario had shifted. His eyes narrowed, calculating, as he swung his rifle toward her. But in tight quarters, muzzle time matters. His weapon was still rising when she closed the distance. She sidestepped, hooked her foot behind his ankle, and used a hip throw to send him slamming into the padded wall. His rifle slipped free, and she caught it mid-fall, spinning it into a low-ready position aimed squarely at his chest. In both military, CQB, and civilian self-defense, proximity neutralizes firepower. Inside arm's reach, the advantage shifts to whoever controls movement, not ammunition. Fourth takedown. Chief Daniels, older and tougher, came in hard, abandoning his rifle for a hand-to-hand rush. He tried a linebacker-style tackle, aiming to drive her into the wall. Elena pivoted sharply, pulling him forward while dropping her center of gravity. Her hip turned across his line of attack, and his momentum carried him airborne for a brief, humiliating second before crashing to the floor. She stripped his sidearm in one smooth motion, racking the slide and aiming from less than 3 feet away. 79 seconds. The whistle blew again, its sound almost anticlimactic after the flurry of movement. 4 commandos lay sprawled on the concrete, 2 dazed, 1 pinned, 1 staring up at her in stunned disbelief. The rifles they'd started with were gone, either in her hands or out of reach. Above, the observation deck had gone silent, the kind of silence that's heavier than noise, where people are still trying to process what they've seen. What Elena demonstrated wasn't brute strength. It was applied geometry and timing. She exploited angles, used their own momentum, and targeted joints and balance points. In military close-quarters combat, the goal isn't to win in the cinematic sense. It's to neutralize threats quickly, conserve energy, and move on. Every move she made was economical, each strike or throw flowing directly into the next. In civilian self-defense, the principles translate. You don't need to overpower an opponent, you need to disrupt their plan. Control a limb, Attack balance, use the environment, tables, walls, even a floor mat, to your advantage. Surprise is your ally. Most attackers expect fear and hesitation. Giving them speed and precision instead changes the fight instantly. For Hale's team, the loss wasn't just physical, it was reputational. They'd gone in expecting a public victory over an outsider. Instead, they'd become the cautionary tale. In any high-ego environment, whether it's special operations or a competitive workplace, being shown up in front of peers changes the social landscape. Respect isn't given, it's taken. Elena had just taken it from all four at once, and she'd done it without firing a single shot. As she stood there, breathing steady, weapons lowered, the unspoken truth filled the air. Skill isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, waits for its moment, and changes the entire room in under a minute and a half. For the spectators on the deck, the lesson was clear. For the four men on the floor, it was personal. And for Elena Ward, it was just another day proving that the most dangerous person in the fight is often the one no one sees coming. For a moment, no one moved. The air in the warehouse hung thick, heavy with the sound of boots scuffing against the concrete and the faint clatter of rifles settling after being dropped. Hale's team was still catching their breath, their faces a mixture of disbelief, bruised pride, and something else, respect they weren't ready to admit. Then from above, the sound of slow, deliberate clapping broke the silence. Not sarcastic, not mocking. Each clap was steady, spaced just enough to command the attention of everyone in the room. Every head turned toward the observation deck. Framed by the harsh light filtering through the high warehouse windows, stood a tall figure in dress greens. The silver eagles on his shoulders caught the light, gleaming against the muted tones of his uniform. Colonel Nathan Abrams leaned casually against the railing, one hand resting on the metal as if he had all the time in the world. He didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. His presence did the work for him. When he began descending the metal staircase, the echo of his polished boots rang against the steel, crisp and unhurried. Each step seemed to punctuate the scene, as if the entire warehouse were holding its breath for whatever came next. Elena didn't turn toward him until he reached the floor. And when she did, her expression didn't change. No smile, no gloating, no sign of the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Been a while, Sergeant Ward," Abrams said, his voice even, carrying just enough to reach the corners of the room. "Yes, sir," she replied, tone respectful but steady. He glanced at the four commandos, still on the ground or just beginning to push themselves upright. Then he looked back at her, and there was the faintest glint of a smile, one that only someone who knew her history would understand. "Gentlemen," he addressed Hale's team, "you might be interested to know that Staff Sergeant Ward here served as the primary close-quarters combat instructor for a NATO Special Operations Task Force. That unit specialized in neutralizing multiple armed opponents in confined environments. Real ones, not plywood." A ripple went through the crowd above. Even among hardened operators, a resume like that carried weight. Abrams continued, "And if memory serves, that was what, 8 years ago?" "10, sir," Elena corrected quietly. "10, he repeated, nodding as if the number itself was impressive. The four commandos avoided his gaze now. Hale, still rubbing his shoulder, shifted his stance. Rix's jaw worked, but no words came out. Vega looked like he wanted to vanish. Daniel stared at the floor. Abrams took a step closer to Elena, his tone carrying an edge of pride without sentimentality. "Good to have you back on a training floor, Sergeant. This base could use more instructors who can demonstrate why their techniques work." "Thank you, sir," she said simply. No embellishment, no recounting of where she'd been, what she'd done, or how she'd just dismantled 4 armed men in 79 seconds. She didn't need to. The evidence lay at her feet. What stood out in that moment wasn't just her skill, it was her restraint. In a place like Fort Wexler, plenty of people would have milked the moment. A smirk here, a cutting remark there, maybe even a little swagger on the walkout. Elena gave none of that. She picked up her gloves, returned borrowed gear to the rack, and started for the exit as if she'd just finished any other training drill. That's the thing about people who've truly done the work. They don't need to talk about it. In fact, the ones you need to watch the most are often the quietest in the room. You see it outside the military too. It's the retired firefighter who blends into a neighborhood cookout until someone chokes. And they're the first one at the scene, clearing an airway before anyone else knows what's happening. It's the grandmother who never mentions her past. But when the bank's computer system crashes, she's the one who used to design software for the Treasury Department. And within minutes, she's guiding the IT staff through a fix. It's the coworker who sits in the back during meetings, letting others argue about strategy, until the moment a real crisis hits, and suddenly they're steering the entire department like they've been doing it all their life. We all know someone like that. Or maybe we've been that person, carrying experience that doesn't fit neatly on a business card, waiting for the right moment when it matters most. Elena Ward was one of those people. Her file might have said Staff Sergeant, but her history carried a weight no printed resume could capture. And when the moment came, she didn't announce it. She showed it. Abrams knew it. The recruits in the stands knew it. And, most importantly, the four men who'd tried to turn her into a spectacle now knew it too. By the time she stepped through the warehouse doors and into the sunlit tarmac outside, the whispers had already begun. In the days to come, the story would spread, how the quiet Army sergeant took on 4 SEALs without a weapon and walked away without breaking a sweat. Elena wouldn't correct them. She wouldn't tell them what was real, what was exaggerated, or what had been left out. She'd just keep showing up, ready for whatever came next. Because people with hidden resumes don't need to convince you of who they are. They wait until the clock starts, and then they let their actions do the talking. When the timer stopped and the whistle blew, the warehouse was no longer the same place it had been moments earlier. Hale's team stayed on the floor longer than necessary, not because they couldn't stand, but because getting up meant facing the rows of eyes above them. Some of those eyes belonged to people they trained with daily. Others were from rival units who'd been waiting for a chance to see the SEALs humbled. Either way, the verdict was already written in the stunned silence hanging over the observation deck. Elena Ward didn't linger to soak in the moment. She stepped back, handed off the borrowed gear, and left the mat with the same calm she'd walked in with. That calm was noticed. It always is. The shift in respect was subtle but real. In the hallway outside, conversations dropped to murmurs when she passed. The kind of glances she got weren't the quick dismissals of an outsider anymore. They were the measuring looks soldiers give one another after seeing what someone can actually do under pressure. By the time she crossed the tarmac to the supply depot, the story had already been condensed into a handful of sentences, traveling through the base. Unarmed, 4 of them, under 90 seconds. At the counter, the supply sergeant barely looked at her paperwork before muttering, "Heard you stirred things up," with the faintest grin. In America, we like to tell ourselves we believe in equal opportunity, that anyone can rise if they have the skill and the will. And yet, underestimation runs deep in the culture, woven into workplaces, schools, even casual social life. We underestimate for convenience. It's easier to label someone probably not up to it than to take the time to really see what they're capable of. We also underestimate for ego. If we decide someone is less skilled than we are, it reinforces our own place in the pecking order. The military isn't immune to this. In fact, high-pressure environments can magnify the tendency. Branch rivalries, gender assumptions, age, background. These all become quick filters to decide who belongs and who doesn't. In civilian life, the parallels are everywhere. The quiet junior employee who gets talked over in meetings until a crisis hits, and they're the one who knows exactly what to do. The neighbor who's dismissed as just a retiree until a storm hits, and they're running a rescue effort better than local officials. The young person assumed to be inexperienced until they navigate a complex problem with skill beyond their years. What made Elena's moment so powerful wasn't just the speed or precision of what she did. It was what she didn't do. She didn't taunt Hale's team afterward. She didn't offer a speech about proving herself. She didn't even allow her expression to suggest she just humiliated 4 of the most confident men on base. Her silence left room for the lesson to sink in on its own. Skill doesn't need a spotlight to be real. Respect is earned by action, not argument. The people you dismiss today may be the ones you depend on tomorrow. By not claiming the moment, she made it belong to everyone who witnessed it. And in doing so, she turned a personal victory into a shared piece of base lore. Think back to the last time you saw someone get underestimated. Maybe it was in a uniform, maybe in a meeting room, maybe in your own family. At first, they were treated like a background player, someone safe to ignore. Then the right situation came along, and they turned the entire room on its head. Those moments have a way of sticking with you. They're sharp, vivid reminders that our first impressions are often wrong, and they force us to reckon with the possibility that our own judgments, spoken or unspoken, might be holding back more people than we realize. Elena's 79 seconds in that warehouse weren't just about 4 SEALs and 1 Army sergeant. They were about every time someone has had to fight through perception before they could even fight the real challenge. What happened that day will circulate through Fort Wexler for months, maybe years. But more important than the story is the shift it caused, the recalibration of how people look at the quiet ones, the outsiders, the ones who seem like they don't fit the mold. Because once you've seen someone rewrite the rules in front of you, it's harder to fall back into lazy assumptions. And that is the kind of respect that lasts. What happened in that warehouse isn't just a military story. It's a mirror for situations we all see in everyday life. In the corporate world, it's the employee who gets sidelined in brainstorming sessions until the day a client crisis forces them to lead, and they turn the entire project around. It's the junior analyst who spots the mistake everyone else missed. In those moments, boardrooms can feel just like Fort Wexler: high stakes, high pressure, and plenty of people ready to doubt you until you deliver. On the field, it's the second string player no one expects to start until an injury forces them into the game and they score the winning point. Locker rooms and military barracks share the same currency: performance when it matters most. Even in families, underestimation shows up in quieter ways. The relative who seems reserved until a crisis hits, and suddenly they're the one holding everyone together. The parent who's dismissed as out of touch until their advice turns out to be exactly what saves the day. The thread is the same. In any environment, whether it's camo, a suit, a jersey, or an apron, actions cut through assumptions. Skill isn't always loud, and the most capable people are often the ones you least expect. That's why stories like Elena Ward's matter. They remind us to look past appearances, to give space for the quiet ones to show what they can do, and to remember that respect is a result, not a gift. If this resonated with you, I want you to be part of the conversation. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Share this with someone who's been underestimated, and drop a comment with your own moment, whether you lived it or watched it happen, so we can build a collection of proof that first impressions aren't the final word. And here's something to think about before you click away. Fort Wexler isn't the only place Elena Ward might be tested. Rumor has it a joint training exercise overseas is coming up. And this time, it won't just be 4 men underestimating her. It'll be an entire unit with a mission where failure isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. The clock will start again, and we'll see if 79 seconds is all she needs.